Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome back to the show Alan Greenfield. He was a world traveler and a teen ufologist by age 16 and has done numerous field investigations of UFO and paranormal phenomenon. He was a founder of the longest-running UFO annual convention, the National UFO Conference, and was twice honored with the Ufologist of the Year Award, and has also been an active occultist since the 1960s. He was featured on the Hellier 2 TV series and experienced many synchronicities related to this, as reportedly have many others. He's written a number of monographs and books, including the current best-selling The Complete Secret Cipher of the UFOnaut, which explains how to correctly understand UFO, cryptid, paranormal, mystical, and magical events as different aspects of one phenomenon. Alan, welcome back. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing just fine. I just remembered I left my tea in the kitchen, but I'll go get it in a little while.
Well, you can actually go grab your tea, because I just want to real quick thank our sponsor, C60 Purple Power. Man, I've been taking it for over 2 months, and the benefits are amazing. You're really going to have to check it out yourself. I have more energy. I sleep better. I have just overall better well-being. Did I already say more energy? Yes. C60 is an amazing antioxidant. It eliminates free radicals. Go check it out yourself. Click the link in the description. You get 10% off and free shipping. Now, Alan, are you back there? There he is. All right. Now, for years, you were involved with organized magic and the occult, and I believe that mainstream society has demonized the word magic and occult, and it seems that certain organizations have saved a lot of the knowledge of the true nature of magic for themselves. I also think that magic is a part of our everyday reality, and we interact with it whether we realize it or not. But I think if we understood more about it and the ways we can interact with it and how it can connect everything, and we can integrate it into society in a positive way, it could benefit the planet, as it was, I'm sure it was in times in our ancient past. And I was wondering if you would just agree, as it's just a science that we don't completely understand yet.
Well, the completely part I don't agree with, because I don't think we understand it at all. We can use it. I don't know if we really have any understanding of it, but I think that we're able to operate within something that it's, I think, not unconnected to quantum physics, and quantum physics physicists work with that. And that's sort of the same range of things, at least I think so. But understanding it is impossible. I mean, there's mathematics that will show you some approximation of how it may work. That it works is all that they really know, and they have a tendency to experiment with it and come up with a answer for all of these mysteries, which is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. It goes back to Wheeler in the 1950s, but it's basically saying we are surrounded by other worlds, and those worlds are as close to us as they could possibly be. I would say razor thin, but I think that would be too thick for the barriers. And I think we have glitches in the matrix all the time, and that may account for UFOs and Bigfoot and all kinds of cryptids and goblins, and it also may be the energy that we're harnessing when we do magical ritual. So I think it's an extension of ideas like ki or prana in the East, or orgon or odic force in Western lore. And I think that it may be the same thing. Dark energy may be sort of filling in the spaces. However, I don't want to get too far afield in that, because I really think that we are talking about things that we're probably incapable of fully understanding. but certain guidelines, you say organizations have carried it forth. I would say individuals working sometimes alone, which is not really good, sometimes with a small group of people, sometimes with what amounts to, in the pre-internet period, pen pals all over the world, sharing information, sharing ideas, which is what I do with Free Illuminism. You know, we have local bodies all over the world, and we interact in various places and share what we've done, what we haven't done, and that's also trying to figure it out, as what we did with Complete Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts, which is not my discovery. The only thing I'll claim is that I applied it to ufology lore, and it had previously only been applied to occult lore, demonology, and all that. As for the notion of it being evil or dark or whatever, dark maybe, evil not at all. I mean, there are people who use it, you know, it's like a gun. Use it in World War II, you save the world. Use it on your neighbor, you're probably a murderer. So, you know, it depends on how you handle it. And I don't do any black magic, and I don't particularly care for it. And the people that are into it are pretty sick.
Now, it seems that the ancients had a greater understanding to this. They interacted with it more. I'm wondering, where did they first find the knowledge of this? Was it given to them by this spirit world, or this omniverse, this other dimension that exists, by beings from there? Or do you think it was they just discovered this somehow?
Well, the Sumerians, who came from rather mysterious origins, I mean, their language was anomalous in Mesopotamia. It was, I believe, a non-Semitic language in an area that Assyria, Babylonia, Israel, all of those had Semitic languages. So like the Egyptians, they just sort of appeared. But their story was they obtained knowledge of the universe from an amphibious being that they characterized as the Oannes. And in Complete Secret Cipher, towards the back of the book, and it's not where you ought to start out, I suggest a ritual which will call forth the Oannes. So we see if we can reproduce that. It's not something that you should try, you know, at first light. It's definitely something that is further down the line. But I'm not sure that that mythos is the earliest possible explanation. I think it may be a reaffirmation of something that goes back to, well, let's come back forward for just a minute, okay? Near-death experiences and alien abduction or fairy abduction experiences are basically, if you just go for the core of it, identical. And presumably techniques have gotten better, so more people have near-death experiences that survive at least long enough to tell their tale of otherwhere. They must have happened in antiquity as well, because, I mean, there are a couple of them mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures about Elijah raising a dead child and Elisha doing somewhat the same thing, maybe the same story, you know, retold at different times, or it may be different stories, or they may have been doing an early version of resuscitation. I don't know, but I do know that if that happened and was recorded, it probably happened a goodly number of times. And of course, if you take the worldwide and very early phenomena of shamanism, the current jargon says you take ayahuasca and you go to the otherwhere, woo, and woo is not my favorite form of, because if you go to the otherwhere and are stoned out of your mind, what you bring back is debatable. But if you in ancient cultures, and some that are still existing, some primitive, quote, primitive cultures. I think we need to re-examine that term a lot. But if you go back to the dawn of any kind of spirituality, you'll find shamanism all over the world. And the criterion that has long been set for a shaman is someone who becomes deathly ill, but who survives the ordeal of fever and coming close to death and reemerges as a more empowered being. And that was the way you became a shaman. And to some extent, I think that in what's left of the Amazon jungle, that is still the criterion for native people becoming shamans. Of course, for outsiders who want to spend mucho dinero on becoming enlightened, they'll give them ayahuasca and try to reproduce the circumstance. It's not a fraud, but it's probably gentler than nearly dying, but nevertheless, I think that's probably a very secondary and more modern technique. More modern meaning, I'm sure it goes back a long way, but shamanism goes back to practically when we dropped out of the trees and stood upright.
Now, you brought up psychedelics. I was going to bring this up later, but since you mentioned ayahuasca, they have many, magical practitioners of throughout history that have used psychedelics to kind of enhance their rituals or whatever they're trying to do. What are your thoughts on the use of psychedelics when it comes to integrating it with magic?
Well, I don't use them, but that doesn't mean that I don't know people who have effectively used them. Unfortunately, I know more people who have gone off on bizarre perils of the path and wind up in some sort of a deep, deep, dark hole. And that's where the reputation for evil comes in. It's either that or someone who starts out trying to invoke angelic beings and winds up invoking demons. It's a bad progression. It's a bad rabbit hole to go down, to use a parallel that is said to have come from the psychedelic universe via the Jefferson airplane. But supposedly the Alice story, which has the mushroom and the caterpillar on the mushroom smoking a hookah, that's sort of the psychedelic story of record that from the 19th century, that the clergyman who wrote the Alice in Wonderland material perhaps indulged himself or talked to people that did. Certainly Alice at that time was a little girl. She was a real little girl at the time. Grew up, lived to a ripe old age, and died sometime in the 20th century, I believe, if I recall correctly. That's not my area, but when you talk about stories like that, even if you have the toned down version that Disney put out there, it's still pretty psychedelic. Point is, how do you know what is delusion in a situation like that? And how do you know what is peering more deeply into reality? I've had all kinds of really, really weird experiences, most of which I don't share because I don't think this should hinge on my experiences. It should hinge on the corporate body of, the corpus of experiences that magicians and seekers of various sorts do. But people are going to use psychedelics. I don't condemn it, but my radar goes beep, 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 beep. I need to keep an eye on this person, and someone needs to be able to say, whoa, you're going off into the light fantastic, and that's not magic, it's addiction.
Now, I don't consider myself an occultist and I don't dabble in magic, but I do love to understand all these things, and I think it gives us a greater understanding of the nature of reality to understand magic and how it can interact with everything. Now, that being said, what would you say are some of the, I guess, different types of magic that we hear about? We have chaos magic, ritual magic, sigils. Could you kind of explain the differences between the types of magic that we hear about?
Well, to be unkind, I don't think there are any differences. I think the differences are artificial. I think what happens is there are two aspects to magic, at least, that I can think of offhand. One is ritual initiation, which takes you from point A to point C via point B. That's inducing crisis and going through that crisis to resolution. And on the other side of initiation, you are a more developed being, more capable of powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. And to borrow something from Superman. On the other hand, I think most magic is identical with the same phenomena that parapsychologists deal with. It's just focused. Parapsychologists will say, focus on a card that is in a building half the world away and tell me what that card is. And there are various randomizing procedures, and has been done in a formal academic setting since the 1930s. It's not nearly as startling as the spontaneous cases where somebody realizes that a beloved relative who was in perfect health the last time you saw them has died, and you know it at the moment that they died, look at the clock, and then find out that's exactly when they died in an unforeseen manner. That happens so often that it defies chance. The laboratory stuff, some of it, and I get this from people like Charles Tart, who's been doing this for, well, he's in his 80s now, doing this for 60 some odd years. And he has, by the way, dabbled in psychedelics, but he's basically a scientist. And I believe he's a tenured professor at one or another university. And there are not a lot of parapsychologists that have that kind of academic legitimacy, because it's still, after 75 years of research, or if you go back to the founding of the Society for Psychical Research, now it's coming up on, what, 150 years? And it still hasn't attained legitimacy, if you define legitimacy as it being a routine part of academia. Of course, when I was undergraduate at Georgia State, which was in the, we will call it the psychedelic period of history, the late 1960s, early 70s, there were classes in tarot and classes in various forms of metaphysics, and that was considered okay then. I suspect if I went back now, you would find that that's not so okay now, but there was a slogan splashed in a lot of psychedelic colors that said Sat Guru in 72, and that was all over the place. Well, the Sat Guru did not change the world as far as I know, but it reflected what was going on campus at that time. And when I went on to the University of Arizona for graduate school, I mean, Tucson is kind of an extension of California. So can I say this, a little bit of that? Nevertheless, the academic curriculum, except in the Free University, was, kind of standard. You had to know the established stuff. And, if you wanted to push on somewhere, you could. And the Free University was recognized on campus. You could even get campus credit for it. I think the graduate students could get credit, and the undergraduate students got, just the same as a classroom experience with an orthodox, English class or whatever. The Free University, I think, of Arizona, pretty well was a school of people that wanted to learn paranormal phenomena, wanted to learn about it, and wanted to be able to generate it. It wasn't, the laboratory tests that I was mentioning, because they can get very boring. There's a There's a boredom factor. If you have someone who's reasonably talented and you do those card guessing or remote viewing or whatever, after the fifth or sixth trial, and you have to do multiple trials or you don't get a statistically meaningful result. The percipient, the person who is doing the telepathy or precognition or remote viewing or whichever they're focusing on, can't help getting bored with doing the same repetitive thing over and over, and their scores tend to decline after a certain amount of time. And some parapsychologists have tried to enliven their experiments in some way, giving some kind of reward. I don't mean money or anything like that. That would be bad science. Guaranteed to be corrupted, much like government is. That's just my particular take in these troubled times. But they would give feedback and say, oh, that was a very good test, without revealing the results until the test run had been done. In Magick, you don't get bored because it's a series of initiations, all of which have if they're done correctly, they have a startling factor where the victim, percipient, call them what you may. Are we still there? Yeah, we're still there. You disappeared. That was amazing. Can you do that again? I have powers, but I can't disappear.
Nope, I hope not. All right. So, all right, let's pick up from where you left off there.
I have no idea where I left off.
We were talking about you said there was really no difference in the types of magic, and you were... in Magick, you're dealing, I think, with the same phenomena that you get in parapsychology. The thing is, there's no attempt to do academic research on what happens in an initiation, what happens when one uses a magical technique. It's done in a kind of the same way as spontaneous cases, except that it's, in a sense, induced. So it's never boring, unlike, card guessing in a parapsychology context. I learned a lot about that whole thing the 5 years that I worked for the Psychic Friends Network. The only one that wasn't going from a script. You had to pass these grueling tests to do that. And I worked the graveyard shift, and let me tell you, that was an ordeal of its own. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, you never knew what was coming up.
Now, when it comes to organized magic, what would you say the difference between some of these groups, such as the Freemasons or the OTO? What's the difference between these organizations?
Okay, the Freemasons have varied a lot over the centuries, partly because, or largely because, they've been responding to criticisms from people who are outside. Their rituals, which were originally secret and still have a reputation of being secret, although if you get a copy of Duncan's Ritual of Freemasonry or a comparable book, you pretty well know what the rituals are all about. And there's a site on the internet in Holland that pretty much has the rituals of every organization that has rituals in the world. I mean, they just have them out there. I was surprised that the B'nai B'rith in the 1800s was a ritual organization similar to the Freemasons. Very little of that survived into my lifetime, but I think what happened was the Knights of Columbus for Catholics and the B'nai B'rith for Jews was a way of what was perceived as a Protestants-only organization. At one time it really was, especially in Europe, not so much here, of white Protestant gentlemen, WASPs. And therefore, these other organizations sprung up. Some of them were very much like Freemasonry. The Oddfellows certainly are. They still exist. And all of these organizations, as far afield as the Rotary Club, banned by Hamas. So that must mean that they have something serious going on. But they are the offspring of Freemasonry. But anyway, Freemasonry started out as a Kabbalistic, ritualistic, occult order in the early 1700s. It grew out of trade masons that used certain signs and grips to in an illiterate society, basically, to share knowledge and to know who was one of the three grades in the time of guilds, which is sort of the precursor of unions. Someone new coming to town could do the right handshake, and they were either considered to be an entered apprentice, a fellow craft, or a master. And it's a different grip, and woe unto him who claims to be one and is of a lesser degree. So it became, from that, it became a mystical society that everybody from aristocrats to the most humble of people were part of. And then towards the end of the 18th century, it began to get shaky. First of all, it was infiltrated by the Bavarian Illuminati, and they had an anti-monarchist approach to, they were basically in a political order that attempted to take over Freemasonry. They didn't. Most Freemasons never became part of the Illuminati, but they did have some consequences in society, the French Revolution being the most famous one. And the Reign of Terror pretty well convinced a lot of people that the Freemasons as an organization were this sinister outfit. So the Masons around the turn of the 19th century, from the 18th century, changed a lot. And none of that has survived in intact form. Like, we changed ritual A to ritual C with flags waving so that no one will think we're subversive. But by the time the Freemasonry that exists today came into existence, there were any number of compromises made, some of them good. Some of them still need to be made, like women are still excluded in the Freemasons. The OTO and several other organizations, and I'm talking about the corporate OTO, there are some variations that are very interesting, but they're this would not apply to them. They basically are a fusion of a particular rite of Freemasonry, one that I've written about, the rite of Memphis and Mitzrayim, which emerged at the beginning of the 19th century, in part out of Cagliostro's Egyptian rite Freemasonry. And that has persisted. And then there was the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, which was not a Masonic organization, but some, at least in my opinion, and I've written about this extensively, some of their ideas, which included subjects that were forbidden in outside circles, especially in Germany and England, like sexual magic and an attempt to revive the Illuminati without the political paraphernalia. The two merged on the watch of a guy named Karl Kellner, a wealthy industrialist in Austria. And I don't know if they really used the term Ordo Templi Orientis in the late 19th century. Certainly the corporate OTO does not claim that. But very early on, one of its members was a guy named Theodore Royce, and he was very interested in the yoga and sexual magic and I think the secrecy of it. And he got a charter to form a body from one of the many claimants to be Grand Master of all Masonic bodies, and fused the secret rituals of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light with the rituals of the Memphis Mitzrayim Freemasonry. And as it is today, whether it is a linear descendant or not, I will leave that to others to say. I think not, but they claim they are. You will find that in the primary degrees, it's very much like Freemasonry, with some stuff thrown in by Aleister Crowley, who had his own agenda. And then there, the middle triad, the lovers triad, so-called, is still Masonic, but it has a lot of variation to it. And the upper degrees are strictly the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. They're I believe the current Grand Master has conjured up some rituals for the 7th, 8th, and 9th degrees, because they were not rituals. They were through Crowley's time, and even through Grady McMurtry, Hymenaeus Alpha's time, which would be 1970s to 1980 something when he passed on. There were no rituals there. If you got to that point in the organization, they taught you certain secrets and taught them as you moved along until the so-called central secret of the OTO, which is a form of sexual magic that you can read about if you read P.B. Randolph's Secret Teachings from the 19th century, which is almost exactly the same thing. And the interesting thing is there are other forms of that type of magic that are out there that are from Tantra in the East to variations that probably would interest QAnon and other bizarre 21st century things, but that are in fact go into forbidden areas that would be forbidden even for me, because if one goes, as Steiner put it, for every step magically, take 3 steps ethically. And the reasons for that, I think, are really profound, because I've seen people who don't do that, and they become neo-fascists. So, there's no advantage to that, and there's a lot of disadvantage to it. You're no longer doing magic, you're doing power trips, and power trips are, there's enough of that in the world as it is.
Now, during your time with organized magic, or at any time at all, have you ever witnessed what could be called, I guess, the summoning of an actual entity that you could visibly see, or some sort of being?
Absolutely. I've done those myself with Enochian workings. I had a group of people that I got together deliberately. Most or all of them had no experience with Enochian magic. And over a period of 30 weeks, it actually was more like 40 weeks, because we took off on the Christmas and New Year's when nobody would have shown up anyway. We had open house in the sense that people would come in and, after 20 weeks, it was not quite the same group of people that you started out with. And what I would do was a very complicated invocation, invoking spiritual energy, egregore, into a seer who would stare into a showstone, which is actually similar to a crystal ball, and go to the air or ether that we were targeting. And there were physical effects, very similar to physical mediumship. So being, knowing that there's a lot of hooey in the physical mediumship world, my Lodge Tyler and myself, we personally guarded the 2 doors to the facility that we were using. Nevertheless, physical effects happen. The best was when, at the end of the session, when I banished the quarters and brought the seer back to this reality, sometimes with weird effects that happen for weeks. And I warned people, after I became aware of it, hey, if you do this, you may get more than you bargained for. But I would ask everybody in the room, and it was on average, I guess, 12 to 15 people. Again, I deliberately, once the doors were locked, they were locked. But those who came in, I simply had to, not know them as in close buddies of mine, but know them well enough to know that they weren't there to, to set off a bomb or, start preaching at us or whatever. And that's only happened once, actually, ever, in my experience. But at a Gnostic Mass, did I hear you mention Satan in that ritual? I said, no, ma'am. Well, why don't you mention Jesus? Well, Jesus to Christians is an aspect of God, you see. This woman was overwrought, and I said, therefore, we have, and I went through this trying to straighten her out, that we were not satanic, and we're a long way from that, actually. But in this series of workings, which I have, fortunately, there was a record kept of it by the lodge secretary at that time, and curiously enough, I found it on one of those sites that the so-called skeptics keeps up. I mean, this is a pre-internet thing that they preserved and put on their site. I suppose because, I'm just guessing, maybe they consider it so absurd that they would put it up there. But in any case, so I would ask after each session. There were a lot of weird things, like when I closed it down, all the lights in the building, in the neighborhood, and up to several miles away went out and stayed out for over an hour. Exact timing. Last word of the ritual, Om, and the lights went out. Another occasion, that didn't need my asking anybody, did you have any experiences aside from the ritual itself? And then I'd ask about the ritual itself. Did you co-scry with the scryer in this Enochian air? And someone who said yes, I said, please describe it. And what they were describing is what people always see in a particular Enochian ether or air. So I considered it self-validating, unless they had, cribbed and read up on it, and I had reason to believe that none of these people did. That Tyler and I were really the only ones who were active magicians. And they were mostly spectators that got drawn in, which is exactly what I wanted. One very memorable occasion, and again, the doors were properly tiled, okay? I was on one door, my Tyler, who was good at what he did and an honest person. I went around the circle, and someone who happened to be an employee of mine, but that's neither here nor there, he said, well, there's nothing really outside of the vision itself that I experienced, except who was the guy that was walking around the circle behind us? And 2 or 3 other people said, yeah, who was that guy? There was no guy. There was a conjuration out of the ether that came into our reality and manifested physically enough that with their backs turned, several people sitting, they were facing inward in the circle, experienced this being of dark, which is, there wasn't anything beyond that, but I would say that, some of these experiences were well, comparable to physical mediumship. Only there was no medium in the room. There was nobody who had, stuffed their pockets with cheesecloth and put it on a coat hanger or anything. It was the real deal. And that's just one example of conjuration of the spirits. The problem with conjuration of the spirits is so many people who are attracted to magical work want to do the dark-sided stuff. And what you invoke is what you get. And I would not, recommend doing that. If you might experiment with trying to understand that. But so many people who are, they've taken their second step in magic. They go right for the Goetia, right for the backside of the tree of life. And maybe an advanced magician can handle that stuff and walk away from it. But someone who is not really, really on top of it, therein lies madness. You get H.P. Lovecraft stuff, and most people can't handle that. And I think there is a limit to what anyone can handle. We are, after all, mortal beings. And I think that I can tell you about these experiences over and over and over. And still, to actually experience it mano a mano or mano a gusto, it's a totally different thing, and it can be shocking, and it can hang around. Another example of that type of thing is that the lodge was not located in a good neighborhood. There was a lot of crime in the neighborhood, and there was a break-in or two, and it was a residential lodge house. It didn't have official sanction, but that's what it was. I was not the lodge master at that time. But there was even a drug dealer in residence, which I thought was uncool altogether, But the lodge master decided, because his wife had been really freaked out by this guy that wandered in. It may have been a hobo or something, but they just walked in the building. And so he decided that we would do this somewhat dark ritual. He was in charge, I wasn't in charge, which is we would take this piece of glass slag, and put some of our own blood into it. This is all the members of the lodge. And we would chant, "Dog of evil, dog of evil," while circling this rock. Well, the dog of evil manifested to various people around the lodge. Nobody else broke in. But then when that particular lodge building, as lodge buildings will, was no longer used, I think it was the treasurer of the lodge's wife began seeing the dog of evil around her house. She actually, you can make of it, whether that was causal or not, I don't know. So they had taken the blood-drenched glass thing home with them, so the dog came too. And eventually they asked me to exorcise it. So I took it to this was more on my watch as lodge master. They took it to the lodge, and I tried everything that I know how to do. I'm pretty good at exorcising. I'm ordained as an exorcist, blah, 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 powers, I could tell that it was still there. So then, getting a little cruder, but right to the point, I took a hammer and I tried to smash this thing. It should have smashed, but it wouldn't. So I said, I believe it was to the Tyler, actually. I said, you know what we need to do? We need to take this out to the Chattahoochee River and drop it in the river. And that's what they did, and we never saw it again.
Oh,
End of story. Yeah, that's one of the spooky ones. I rarely mention that because I would not have done the dog of evil thing on my own. To use the word evil in a ritual context is begging for it.
right. Yeah, it seems like it would be.
Well,
Now,
it worked.
yeah.
On one hand, it worked. On the other hand, so what? It brought something evil into a world that has all too much evil as it is.
You're right about that. Now we have to talk about synchronicities, especially for me. Lately, synchronicities have been just running rampant. I mean, I could be thinking about a song, they'll start playing. I would say a word, and somebody on TV will say the same word at the same time. I'll think about somebody, they'll call me. Just all these things are happening more and more lately, and I know that you have to follow these synchronicities. I know they're trying to lead us somewhere. What are your thoughts on this and the importance of just following these synchronicities and numbers and things that occur?
I think that there are two aspects of synchronicities. The kind that you're talking about would be the second form that I'm going to mention. The first form, I think, is implicit in the universe. Things like the Fibonacci sequence of numbers is implicit in galaxies and in butterflies, and that's sort of not chaos magic, but chaos theory, which is another physics idea that I find very persuasive, that the universe generates certain things that if you tune into them, they coincide, that they are synchronous with where you are at that given moment. I think that's exceedingly important in cosmological terms and maybe even in religious terms. I mean, or spiritual terms is a much better. I wish the Pew Research people would stop using the word religion and going by church attendance on how many people are spiritual, because that's old school and it creates a false effect. There are lots of people who aren't churchy at all who are very spiritual. Even people who don't like that word are still, they're practicing yoga and doing pretty exotic things that anyone outside of it that knows comparative spirituality would say that's spiritual. Be that as it may, I think that what happens involves what in the Golden Dawn /AA/OTO universe, that is organized magic, known as the secret chiefs of the Third Order, which, by the way, most of the contemporary group have sort of lost their interest in. It's like it's old business. It was people that swear by Aleister Crowley, who everything that he did, he attributed to the secret chiefs of the Third Order. And by Third Order, it means the order beyond what human beings can attain in corporeal form. But they're still human beings that are sort of our guides. And that comes from maybe the Theosophical Mahatmas or the Ascended Master of the Mount Shasta group of I think they're all the same thing. There's a Jewish legend called the Lamed-Vavniks. It's the 36 righteous people that exist unknown to humanity, but for their sake, the world is not destroyed, even though it's an evil place. But well, I'm lost in.
We're talking about synchronicities.
Okay.
Yeah, and you were going to tell me that there was a second type.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you about. I believe that if you are doing something of a magical nature, whether you call it that or not, the secret chiefs know it. And although there are many steps along the way, they provide synchronicities, maybe using that energy that is in the first system. They provide them for the individual who is doing whatever. With me, it's anything that I read by or about Philip K. Dick, the synchronicities come hot and heavy. You know, the people that did the Hellier thing, they followed the synchronicities, and it got deeper and deeper. And if it wasn't for the COVID-19 pandemic, I think they would already be, well, maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe they're doing season 3 with masks on. Masks are not forbidden in magical practice. But the point is, they didn't start out as magicians at all, but they were smart enough to follow the synchronicities. There seems to be, the reason I say that it's the secret chiefs who are behind it, there seems to be an intelligence behind that kind of synchronicity. That is, if you do A, 1 will follow. If you do B, 2 will follow. If you do C, even if they don't follow any logical progression, which is something that I've heard a lot of criticism of Hellier. There's not a lot of criticism, but people say, well, they started out looking for goblins, and what they got was synchronicities. Yeah, that's exactly the case. But the further they got, the more sensational the synchronicities got. And I believe that that path didn't end with the last episode of season 2. And I think that's it's probably ongoing. So what you need to ask yourself is, what other thing am I doing that apparently stimulates the synchronicities? And what are the synchronicities trying to say to me? That is why I think that, you know, if there is indication that there is intelligence behind a phenomena, one must assume that some kind of intelligence knows. And since it's got to be some kind of beyond normal intelligence, because if it's affecting you, it affects me. It affects almost everybody that I know of that dabbles in any of this stuff or goes beyond dabbling. If they're smart enough to take the synchronicity and say, what does this mean, and how will it affect my path in life? And if you follow that one, another one will follow. That's clearly guidance. And unless it guides you to something untoward or illegal or something that's going to wind you up dead or in the pokey, I would say follow it. You know, I mean, I know people that have followed it right to death row, but the meaning of it is in the synchronicities itself. It's like, what does this mean? What it means is, this is a road sign. It says turn right here, and if you turn left, you're out of the loop. If you turn right, you will be rewarded with another synchronicity. Now that I think about it, it's a little like Pokemon.
I've never played Pokemon, but I know what you're talking about. Now, you mentioned these secret chiefs. Would you consider these the same as our spirit guides or our guardian angels or higher self?
I think sometimes they get lumped.
You were breaking up there. You were breaking up there for a second. We didn't hear you.
Okay, where did I disappear?
I had asked you if the secret chiefs are the same as our spirit guides or our guardian angels. Would you consider that sort of the same thing?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sounds like a commercial for something. I think they're sometimes lumped together as one phenomena, and I think at a certain level that's true, that angelic appearances, which has saved my life, including my derriere, which is what I was most inclined to say, more than once, and always of a certain type of character, but that set me on a particular course. And always in the form of human beings who in retrospect, didn't seem to be human beings. Are those guardian angels? Are those angelic beings? Are they hallucinations? And why do secondary people see them as well? I mean, there's just a host of things that they could be. But I suspect that in an ultimate sense, guardian angels are semi-autonomous beings at one with the universe. They're way beyond the secret chiefs. Secret chiefs, and I can't emphasize this enough, no one who has delved into one or another version of that, not the Theosophists or the Thelemites or the Golden Dawn people, any of those, have ever said that they're not human beings, but they're human beings that have ascended, who have been gone beyond the physical. And the Eastern, the Buddhist version of that is the Bodhisattva, the notion that people who have attained to nirvana, which is not, don't ask me to define that because it's a whole different system, which is why I favor the Western system for Western brains. A bodhisattva is one being who chooses not to enter nirvana, but to retain contact with the physical world until all beings are liberated. I like the sentiment, even whether I, believe it's literally true or not is a totally different thing. I think that the same is true of the secret chiefs, ascended masters, whatever. The first order and the second order are human. They're people that aspire. First order is aspiration. Second order is people that are still people, but people that can do a lot of magical work or can heal. They're healers, whatever their particular talents are. Third order, you can't contain it in the vessel that the human body is. That's why in the Hebrew scriptures it says that if you see the face of God, you will die. So Moses supposedly says, can I see you? And God says to him, not coming towards you because that will kill you, but I will allow you to see me walking away. The anthropomorphic part of that is disturbing to modern sensibilities, but I think that under the story there is that notion that seeing hypernatural beings can just overwhelm a human being. Richard Shaver had the same sort of thing, that some of these beings that used to live in the interior of the earth, and before that on the surface of the earth, he said, and many other people have validated, that they had a radiant energy so strong that it was beyond the capacity of an ordinary person to bear. They had to keep their distance from them because they just simply radiated too much energy. And I would say that, at that point, they discorporate. They cease to be ordinary human beings, and they become ascended beings. And they can either go on to something else altogether, which probably the majority do, or they can choose to be the guardians of humanity. Guardians is another term out of the Borderland Sciences catalog, that the guardians of humanity, I'm not talking about the comic book, I'm talking about something that goes way back. I think all of these are the same thing, basically. Those beings who have ascended, but who devote themselves to helping humanity. You can say, why don't they help more? That's not a riddle I'm prepared to answer. All I can say is, if you do the synchronicities right, you're on the path that they were on when they were fleshly human beings.
Well said. Now, as a closing thought tonight, with everything the way it's going now, all these technological advancements, people kind of being pushed towards more of this just technological age where the material is becoming more important than spirituality. But I also see at the same time there is this group of people that are becoming more spiritual and more open to magical practices. Where do you see our future going? Do you see it to where it'll be eventually just all this technocracy where we won't have any spiritual practices anymore? Or do you see a revival, or maybe a combination of both?
If it's a combination of both, I think that it will be very interesting, because technology moves towards like quantum computing. I think if you have an efficient quantum computer, it's going to develop intelligence, a soul, if you will. And that, all bets are off in terms of what is technology and what is magic. And at risk of quoting the well-known quote from Arthur Clarke, a truly advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic. I think we're headed into very, very interesting times.
I would agree. Very well said. And that is perfect to end the night. Now, if people want to find your book, The Complete Secret Cipher, where can they go? What's the best place?
Okay, well, there are several best places. You can get it directly from the publisher, Paranoia Press, but you probably will get it quicker if you go to any of the non-brick and mortar Barnes & Noble. Amazon has it. Amazon UK has it, if someone is seeing this in England. Actually, we have quite a European market for this. Don't just read it, though. For God's sake, assimilate the notion of the secret cipher itself and use it. Until The Complete Secret Cipher came out, I was very frustrated with the notion that people were reading the book. It's always, had periods of really good sales, but they weren't using it. Along came the Hellier folks, and they talked about The Complete Secret Cipher a lot. And now people, I guess they don't want to listen to me, but they will listen to Greg and Dana. And if they're listening to Greg and Dana, that's fine. I'm not looking to, make brownie points for myself. I'm looking for people to use what I developed out of the discovery of the cipher, which was done in England. So go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, go to any of the others that I don't know about, because they all carry it. And I believe it's reasonably priced. I have nothing to do with distribution or publishing or any of that. That's not my deal. I write it. I write it and I read it. And every time I read it, I wish I wrote it differently. But that's not the major thing. The major thing is that I write it, and publishers are good enough to pick up most of what I do, and distributors distribute, and buyers buy it. And if they buy it, hopefully they'll work with it. And if they don't, maybe they'll just enjoy the trip.
Well, I know me and my audience love hearing from you, so we'll definitely have to have you back on again in the future. Alan, thank you so much. Always fascinating information, and have a great rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you so much. It's always good to be with you.